Hey everyone, you're listening to Vegan Theology. This is episode 23 with Kevin and Sarah Hale. Hey Sarah.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. The sun is shining and it's awesome out.
Yeah.
Spring is awakening.
Yeah. It's a little unusual for Montana right now, this time of year.
Kevin actually accidentally spilled some blueberries outside our door this week. And we've really been enjoying watching the magpies discover the blueberries. And it's so interesting. Like, one will come down and pick up a couple blueberries and like lay them on the snow so they're really visible, and then to kind of sit there until another one comes. And then the first one will pick up the two that he or she found and fly away. And then the new one will do the exact same thing. Pick out a couple, sit there, wait for someone new to come. It's like they're signaling to each other.
They're really smart.
It's really fun. So yeah, third Sunday of Lent is where we are. And what we've been doing is discussing some of the lectionary scriptures for this week and how they may have something to say about our relationship with animals. And then we've been discussing Wild Hope, which is a book that is highlighting different animals around the world who are in danger of going extinct.
Yeah.
Things that
very interesting book.
Yeah, and I mean, I know when I reached out to the author, Gayle Boss, a few weeks ago, I was saying, thank you so much for this book. And she said, yeah, a lot of people have told me it's hard for them to get through. It's pretty depressing. It's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
Just talking about animal after animal after animal after animal who's suffering just to survive. And their numbers are drastically reduced
Right.
In the last few years. And, so yeah, it's depressing in many ways. But I still think it's important for us to know about them and to consider what we can do as humans to change the way it's going.
Right.
And Lent is just such a good time for that. Lent is all about really coming face to face with how things are not the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the lectionary scripture readings for the third Sunday of Lent. So far, I don't read ahead. So far, I've been so amazed every week. I feel like, wow, if I would have handpicked some scriptures that had to do with animals,
Right.
this might be where I would go. So far, every week, and we'll see if this continues, there's plenty of tie-in with the lectionary scriptures and our relationship with animals. So I'm actually going to take a look at 3 of the 4. So there's always an Old Testament, a psalm, an epistle, and a gospel. And we're going to look at the Old Testament, the epistle, and the gospel today. So the Old Testament is Exodus 20, 1 through 17. Do you know what that is, Kevin?
Exodus 20. Is that the 10 Commandments?
Okay. Yes. It is. It is the 10 Commandments. And I think that our relationship with animals are directly related to 2 of these commandments. But just for fun, could we name the 10 Commandments? Listener, our devoted listeners, could you name the 10 Commandments? If you had asked me this before I started preparing for this show, I would have really struggled, to be honest.
Yeah.
Naming the 10.
Yeah, well, I do know, I believe the first 4 have to do with our relationship with God.
Good.
And the final 6 have to do with our relationship with each other, human beings.
Right.
And I guess the created order, animals and everything. So, oh my. I'm sure the first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, or something to that effect. Maybe not. Okay, don't make any graven images of God.
That's number 2.
Oh, it's number 2. Yeah.
So, but yeah, you're on the right track. The first one is don't have any other gods.
Okay.
So don't have any other gods. Number 2 is basically no idol worship.
Right.
Don't make an idol and bow down to it. Okay. 3. So we know it has to do with our relationship with God. It's the one that's usually translated, don't use the Lord's name in vain.
Oh, okay.
But this is one that I think does have to do with animals because Dr. Carmen Joy Imes of Wheaton College has published several books, of course, but the one I'm referring to right now is Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters. And she goes into this commandment and says, this really has nothing to do with language and using God's name and how we say God's name. That's really not what it's talking about. What it's talking about is don't misrepresent me in the world. You are my representatives. Don't misrepresent me. When people look at you, they're learning about me. So please don't misinform them.
That's interesting because I think one of the other commandments when it comes to people is it says do not bear false witness against another person, right? And a lot of times that gets translated into don't lie, but it's really not about lying. It's about gossiping maybe or making up false things about other people.
It's a legal thing. Don't go into court and bear false testimony against someone.
Interesting.
We were going to get there.
Oh, sorry. Well.
So how does that have to do with animals? Well, we are, again, as God's representatives on the planet, we are supposed to be exercising dominion in a godly way, which means we are supposed to be nurturing, cultivating, allowing to flourish. Like that's our role, is making sure all of creation is flourishing and thriving. But when we misuse our power, misuse our dominion in the world, that is misrepresenting God to the world. And I think that has everything to do with what we're reading in Wild Hope about what we're doing to these animals, driving them to extinction for our own greed, really. So, yes, number 1, no other gods. Number 2, no idol worship. Number 3, don't misrepresent me in the world. Number 4, keep the Sabbath.
Oh, keep the Sabbath. Nice.
Keep the Sabbath. And I want to come back to that one because it definitely has implications for animals. But then 5 is honor your parents. Then 6, we have do not kill. 7, do not commit adultery. 8, do not steal. 9 is what you alluded to earlier. Do not bear false witness against anyone. And 10, do not covet. This is all really good advice, by the way.
It sounds like
These are good ideas.
It sounds like God doesn't want us to be capitalists. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely ties in to, I think, the theme of the day, honestly, because as we will see as we continue, the thread that goes throughout this whole show, I think, is the things that the world says matter and are important and what we venerate, God has no respect for them. God has a very different paradigm.
Ethic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A very different matrix through which God views everything compared to how we do. Let's go back to the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days shall you labor, do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This 10 commandments also appear in Deuteronomy 5. So this one, the reason given for the Sabbath is creation. The 6 days of creation, the 7th day of rest. In Deuteronomy, the justification for the Sabbath is you were slaves and now you're free. And so you should have a day of not toiling. But one thing I always feel like it's missed, right? When we talk about the Sabbath, is it doesn't just have to do with humans. You know, I'm sure it was revolutionary to the Hebrews when they received this, that it's not just you and me that shouldn't do work on one day.
Yeah.
And our children. It's also our servants. They shouldn't be doing any work for one day. I'm sure that was quite revolutionary. But God doesn't stop there. God says, even your animals, I don't want your animals to have to do any work on this day. A whole day off for even your animals. And for any foreigners that happen to be with you, they should be included in a day of no toil. So for me, this is so rich. Even to this day, having a Sabbath day is so countercultural. It's really difficult to do. And it doesn't make sense in the ways of the world where we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to eke out a living. We're trying to get ahead. We're trying to acquire that which we desire or accomplish something or achieve things. God says, I want you to take one day and put all of that down and make it a day just to rest and delight and remember me and worship. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, to me it seems even like, again, this is just one example where we don't really think about it, but it's God making a covenant with all of creation. We typically, we've grown up in a very anthropocentric theology, and yet here it is, God is saying, oh, by the way, don't till your land, don't make your animals work, and like you mentioned, even servants, like everyone, everything gets a break. So, I mean, that's just just nice to know that God cares about his creation, and it's about the whole creation.
Right. Right. And compared to what we do to animals in animal agriculture, so many different arenas, they don't get a day where they just get to rest and heal and recuperate.
Right.
What a loving God.
Right.
God's love goes far beyond what we typically imagine.
Right.
So let's move to the epistle. 1 Corinthians 1:18-31. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs, Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. The weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you are wise by human standards, but many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God, that is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. Again, God's ways are upside down compared to the world. God's ways are totally backwards. They don't make sense. Our world is about power and wisdom and intelligence and influence and who you know.
Right.
And all the achievements. And God's ways are about turning that upside down. God cares about the lowly. God cares about the weak. God uses weakness to beat the strength of the world. It's this beautiful, mysterious world of God, or the way that God is, that reminds us, we see it in Jesus. And it just reminds me of what we learned so much from Lindsay, that Jesus is our example. And Jesus used self-sacrificing love to beat everything, to beat sin.
Right.
And we are to be like Jesus. When we enter into the world, we're supposed to use our power to serve, to sacrifice ourselves for others. Even though that we're considered the pinnacle of creation, we're not to use our power to treat the rest of creation with impunity. I mean, and those of us who have thought of ourselves that way, theologically, we've completely lost the plot.
Right.
The human species, thank you, once again, Andrew Lindsay, the human species is unique and singular in our ability to serve the rest of creation. This ties back in with the fourth commandment. The Sabbath doesn't make sense in this world, but God is about peace and love and actually being able to rest and enjoy creation.
Right. And what comes up for me at the moment anyway, I keep thinking about it, when we talk about debt and everything, we're really not focusing on it here, but it's just interesting even in the concept of the year of Jubilee, right? I think it's every 49th year, 7 times 7, that all debts would be forgiven. It's kind of a reset. It's almost like a generational reset. And to me, that's fascinating that, if our culture practiced something like that,
wow,
that would be amazing.
Yeah.
You could give someone their life back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, to me, that concept is just unbelievable.
Right. In a world where when you wonder, like, why is this so screwed up? Why is that so screwed up? And the answer is always, well, look at who's making money from that. Well, they don't want to lose that profit.
Right.
Like, that is the only standard.
Well, and that's when, especially when we're eking out, like by the month, by the week, by the quarter. Do you know what I mean? Like to let a whole year go, something like that. Like to just forgive all that debt. That's just unthinkable. So actually, I guess it's the 50th year, but it's after the 7th Sabbath year. So 7 years of 7 Sabbath years.
Yeah.
So it would be on the 50th year, the year of Jubilee. Anyway, the whole idea sounds fantastic. I wish we did that. I'm serious.
Yes. Well, and again, it just speaks to God's character of forgiveness rather than punishment, freedom rather than bondage, enjoying life rather than being squashed by the powers.
Right.
Let's go to the gospel. John chapter 2, 13th through 17. And I just had to start laughing when I saw what that is. That is where Jesus enters Jerusalem.
Oh, my.
And the first thing he does.
Oh, wow.
is he goes to the temple and he cleanses the temple.
Wow.
So I'll read this. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both the sheep and the cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." And of course, the Jews said, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?"
Right.
And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days." So what a fascinating passage. And let's just be honest, growing up, hearing this story, the interpretation that I was taught as a child is that money in the church, businesses being run in the church, business talk in the church, God frowns on that. This is not the place to bring profit and goods for sale. And, so anytime people talked about doing any kind of business on the church property, it was like, oh, let's be really careful, because remember what Jesus said about doing business in the church or in the temple. Then I got a little bit older and went to Bible college, and the interpretation I was given was this was all occurring in the outer court of the temple, which was the one place where Gentiles were allowed to come and worship God at the temple. And in another reference of the cleansing of the temple, Jesus says, "My house is to be a house of prayer for all nations, and you've turned it into a marketplace." Well, they were crowding out the area that the Gentiles were allowed in.
Right.
And that made a lot more sense to me. That resonated.
Right.
That Jesus is saying, I don't just care about Jews worshiping here. I want anyone to be able to come and worship me here, or God here. And I think that there is some validity to that.
Right.
Yeah, you've totally disregarded the Greeks, the Gentiles among you.
Right.
And their right to be able to come in here.
Right.
And have a place to worship. But what has been totally overlooked is the interpretation that Andrew Lindsay says. What do you think they were selling in there? They weren't selling chocolates.
Right.
They were selling animals.
Right.
That the temple somehow at this point in history, the temple had become basically a slaughterhouse, especially at the Passover, the biggest holiday of the year. And Jesus comes in and casts out all the sacrificial animals, frees them basically. It's like an animal rescue of sorts. Potentially, this is just something that's completely overlooked.
Right.
Is that Jesus might be making a statement about animal sacrifice. And some have said this was what really made the authorities angry and decided we have to get rid of this guy because he had just turned their profit. They were looking forward to huge profits.
Right.
Because everybody...
I'm sure they were planning maybe their year around, hey...
This is probably, yeah.
It's their big holiday. They're going to make a ton of
money. This is their Black Friday.
Right.
Where they make most of their profit for the year.
Right.
And Jesus comes in and ruins it.
Right.
And the loss of money, the loss of profit is what really upset them to the point where we have to get rid of him.
Right.
So again, I think all of these scriptures, the connecting theme is that power and money and the ways of this world, that's what God despises. God does not respect the ways of this world. God stands up against those with power and influence, especially when they're abusing it.
Right.
God is always on the side. So if you look at the 10 Commandments, the 4th commandment about animals and everybody getting a day off to enjoy life and enjoy God, and then the epistle that Jesus shows us that his way is to serve and to love through self-sacrifice, and he turns the whole system upside down. And then the gospel, which is Jesus not caring about the economics of the sacrificial system and setting the animals free, is that God is always on the side of the lowly, including the animals, the servants and the slaves, those the world does not esteem, which to me, that's theology I can get behind.
Right.
You know, talking about God this way is exciting.
Yeah. Again, and it comes back to what we've always said. It's consistent, right? It's God caring for all of creation.
Right.
You know, it's not just man that he cares about or humans, but it's animals and everything. So anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, I love it. This is the kind of thing where I'm like, yeah, the more you learn about Jesus, the more you love him. Because everything that is wrong with this world, Jesus stands up against those systems that are depleting the world and causing bondage to humans and the rest of creation.
Right. For Lent, we have been focusing on Gayle Boss's book, Wild Hope, Stories for Lent from the Vanishing. And this week, week 3, we're going to focus on her chapter, The Homeless. And it focuses on 4 animals, the monarch butterfly, the North Atlantic right whale, the polar bear, and the lowland tapir. All 4 of these animals are interesting. And it just is a reminder about our stewardship, because in this case, in this chapter, all 4 of them are being affected by animal agriculture.
Wow.
Again.
We still have so much to learn about the interconnectivity, the interconnection between everything.
Right.
We love to silo things and act like, oh, this isn't affecting anything. It's affecting everything. Insects, the ocean animals, animals in the Arctic, around the polar regions. It's like, it's affecting so much. Like, one thing I think is fun is that there are human beings who are concerned and who are trying to help with each of these different species of animals. Every chapter is told, or every section of the chapter is told through the eyes or from the perspective of certain scientists who are following these animals and tracking these animals and documenting and trying to help where they can these animals to survive.
Yeah.
At least there's that. At least there are human beings who are involved and who are trying to make a change for the better.
Right. Yeah.
So we should celebrate. I mean, we should acknowledge, like, there are human beings, and in this way, at least, they are living out the human commission, which is to take care of this planet.
Right. Another reminder, what if they're, like you said, they're scientists, they're biologists. What if they're not Christians? Which is fine.
Right.
They're just doing God's work. It's just interesting that the church is forfeiting their responsibility and letting potentially other people take it up. But in this particular case of the monarch butterfly, they have a huge migration that extends from Canada to Mexico.
Wow.
And through their migration, they stop somewhere in the Midwest, United States, roughly around May, and they're searching for milkweed.
They love to lay their eggs right on the milkweed plant so that when that little egg hatches, the larva, then caterpillar, consumes the milkweed.
Yeah.
And it's the milkweed, I guess, that turns them this orange color. And it also makes them toxic to predators. I remember living in New Hampshire, and I think when our youngest, our son Sam, was in kindergarten, they had a monarch butterfly that they were taking from egg to butterfly in their classroom. And so one of the things we got to do as a family was go out and find milkweed to take in so that when the egg hatched, the little caterpillar would have plenty of milkweed to eat. And then, of course, it went into its metamorphosis and became a butterfly. And then, the kids released it, which was obviously very exciting. But yeah, I remember being out there on the side of the road, on a dirt road in New Hampshire, looking for milkweed, and so he could take it into class.
Yeah. What we're finding with the case of the monarch butterfly is that in the Midwest there's less and less milkweed due to a particular pesticide, which we've all heard of, called Roundup. And so what's happening is there's less and less milkweed. It's typically not necessarily in the fields, but it's on, like you said, the roadsides. It's in little ditches. So these monarch butterflies are trying to do their best to find milkweed that has not been sprayed with Roundup.
She doesn't ever mention Monsanto by name, but this is a chapter about Monsanto and just one of the many, many, many ways that they are destroying, and I'm using that word intentionally, they're destroying so many parts of our world. But Monsanto is the manufacturer of Roundup, which contains glyphosate. And Monsanto creates corn and soybeans that are immune to glyphosate.
Genetically modified.
But, of course, everything else, the wild plants and grasses that grow, are killed by glyphosate. So by spraying their crops and spraying their fields with glyphosate, one terrible consequence of that is that milkweed is basically going extinct. And with no milkweed, there are fewer and fewer monarchs. Since the introduction of Roundup, 90% of monarchs have vanished.
That's crazy. And again, this is all pretty much for soybean and corn, which is the big crop to feed animals for animal agriculture.
Yeah, I think at least at a minimum, 70% of all the corn and soybeans grown in our country is fed to livestock.
Yeah.
So once again, if we got rid of animal agriculture, we could rewild so much of this land that's being used to grow crops to feed animals. It's such an inefficient system of trying to feed these animals so that then we can grow them and kill them and eat them. If we were just eating the plants, we would need far less farmland.
Yeah. Cut out the middleman, and the return on investment is not worth it when you consider what it takes to feed the animals with water, all the resources, and then the damage that it's doing. It's not worth the investment.
And I guess she talks about how these farmers in this Midwestern area, they've been told that monarchs are going extinct because of the Roundup. And obviously, farmers are not evil people.
Right.
They don't want to drive the monarchs to extinction. There are government programs that will pay them for letting tilled land go fallow or even planting milkweed. But, it's a gamble for them. They already have razor thin
margins,
profit margins. And, so it's asking a lot of the struggling farmer to grow a field of milkweed
Yeah,
for the butterflies.
for sure.
But this is good information for us to have. We should not be supporting Monsanto or their product, Roundup. And this is just one reason,
Just
one more
one
reason.
more. Yep, absolutely. So the North Atlantic right whale, this particular chapter focuses on them, but on a specific whale who's named Kleenex.
I thought it was interesting that she said the reason they've been named right whale, RIGHT, is because they were considered the right whale to fish and kill. Like, those are the right whales. Let's go get them. You know.
Right. No, it's sad. And this particular whale named Kleenex, she was first sighted in 1977. And at the time of this writing, which I suppose is roughly somewhere around 2018, she is the size of a school bus. And she's weighing 150,000 pounds, and she is massive, and she's wonderful. And what's interesting about her and her children is that they are challenged to be able to breed and live in the ocean, mostly due to fishing gear. And the right whale, we know this, right? We've seen other documentaries. We know other facts that it's interesting that we talk about not using a plastic straw, but then the majority of the plastic in the ocean is abandoned fishing gear.
Yeah.
It's not bottles and bottle caps and straws. It's abandoned fishing gear, broken fishing gear.
The nets, the lines, the ropes, all of it.
So that's the majority of the plastic in the ocean. And in this particular case, these whales are getting wrapped up in the ropes that are connecting the buoys on the surface of the ocean to, like, lobster traps and crab traps. And so what's happening is they're getting tied around their mouths, and they can't open their mouths fully. When they can't open their mouths all the way, they don't get all the energy and nutrition they need to survive. And so she mentions that they're slowly starving, and it's just unfortunate.
In fact, I thought it was also heartbreaking that the way the scientists identify the different whales is by the scars they have from all the ropes that they've been tangled in. So it leaves these bright white scars on their bodies. These lines are basically just to show the fishermen where their traps are. They're not being used to actually catch any fish, but the whales get tangled up in them. It says each year the ropes catch at least 50 right whales. She mentions that, like, back when the Pilgrims first arrived on the continent, they claimed they could walk across Cape Cod Bay just stepping on the backs of right whales.
Right.
They were so
plentiful.
And now they think maybe 400 right whales exist, are alive today. And only 100 of those 400 are breeding females.
Right. That's just so unfortunate.
Like, the breeding females need so much more energy to live and to gestate calves.
Right.
And so they are starving at a faster rate than the males.
That's so unfortunate.
She mentions at the end that they're trying to design workable, affordable crab and lobster traps that don't use the lines with the buoys so that they can stop mangling these whales.
Yeah.
I would hope that they would be able to do that, you know.
You'd think with all the technology we have.
So again, that's a perfect example of humans using their intelligence, humans using their power as the pinnacle of creation. Instead of just using it for profit, we could use it to think, oh, we could kill less whales if we just use our intelligence to figure out a different way of doing this.
Right. But this is what we find out about all kinds of fishing, right? There's what they call bykill. You're fishing for a certain fish, or fishermen are, but they're catching dolphins, and they're catching sharks, they're catching turtles, they're catching all these other things they don't intend to catch. But these nets are massive, so of course they're going to catch everything.
Right.
You know, it's just unfortunate. There's got to be a better way. the next animal, polar bear. And again, this comes back down to greenhouse gases.
Mm.
And of course, we like to make the argument that the biggest driver of climate change as it pertains to greenhouse gases is actually animal agriculture.
Right.
A lot of people want to blame fossil fuels, but we think it's more animal agriculture, nitrous oxide, methane, and of course, CO2.
And of course, this isn't just an opinion. It's not just what we think. There's plenty of data out there
Right.
that has uncovered this. In fact, the documentary Cowspiracy has a wonderful website that they keep up that documents all of these studies that shows that animal agriculture is actually the leading driver of greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. So the polar bear mother would birth a cub. She'd make a den on the ice or very close to the water. And now what's happening is she has to build a den further away from the water. But the idea is that as soon as she wakes up with this cub, they're hungry and they need quick energy. And of course, if you have a den right on the water or very close to the water, you can
Right.
catch a seal and you can feast and get the energy you need. And so the further you are from the water, the harder it is to catch seals.
It's so heartbreaking because it follows the mother polar bear as she's getting ready to hibernate. So, of course, she's trying to eat everything she can. And then she finally finds a place she finds acceptable to make her den, which is further away than, previous generations of polar bears have been to the water, just so that she could be on solid ice. She gives birth to twin cubs. And of course, they're nursing from her. And so as they grow bigger and bigger and bigger, she's getting thinner and thinner and thinner and emaciated, which is just really tragic.
Right.
When they finally leave the den and she's ravenous, not only is it more scarce hunting because of climate change, but because she's so emaciated and so hungry, she's also a very poor hunter.
Right. Low energy. Yeah.
And clumsy. Yeah, it says blubbery ringed seals are the one food both energy rich enough and attainable for her, but they're becoming less attainable as greenhouse gases warm the planet. And Gayle Boss mentions that over 3 decades, the number of bears in southern Beaufort Sea has been cut nearly in half. Populations in other seas that are stable right now will kind of follow the same story if greenhouse gases are not curbed.
Pretty sad. So the last animal, it's called the lowland tapir, and it is from South America and is the largest and oldest mammal. It's a survivor of 20 million years of change.
Wow.
That's crazy. They're interesting looking animals. They have like these little mini trunks and they kind of go into these swamps, I guess, and they stick their trunk out so they can breathe.
Like a little snorkel.
Yeah, and they're almost covered. And they're almost like, they look to me, they're almost like they're a horse with rhinoceros skin and a trunk, or, you know what I mean? Or a horse with elephant skin and a trunk. They're very interesting animals.
Kind of a prehistoric survivor.
Yeah,
Wow.
very interesting looking. What's going on with them is the savannas of Brazil.
I think they're called the cerrados.
So yeah, these cerrados are getting mowed over, I guess, to make room for animal agriculture.
Wow.
We just love our beef. So American agronomists, they discover that by pouring lime on the soil, it actually makes the yield of soybeans and corns just more plentiful. And so since the native grasses that these tapirs are normally feeding on are being plowed under, what's left are these alien grasses that they're not used to. And of course, these alien grasses are just covered in pesticides.
Wow.
And so these pesticides are eroding the enamel of the teeth on these tapirs. Yeah, and the other unfortunate thing is a lot of the villagers started hunting tapirs as well.
Right.
And so you've got animal agriculture pushing them out, and then you've got what are left of them being hunted.
Right. So it's like they're getting hit on all sides. Their food source is gone. Trying to find food, they're getting hit on the roads.
Right. So they're roadkill.
Because of more and more roads are being built for animal agriculture. And then the people there are hunting them for their meat. they're peaceful animals. They have never done anything to anybody.
Right.
And they're just getting hit on all sides.
Right. And the natural order of them, they would eat these grasses and then they would, graze, and they would basically, their dung had seeds in it. And so they were planting new trees and things wherever they were, miles from where they'd eaten.
Right.
So there was this natural order of things. And none of that's happening, or less of it is happening.
Again, we said, this is a little bit depressing to just talk about animal after animal after animal that's hanging by a thread. And this scientist that this part of the chapter is based on, she goes into schools and she tries to get the kids excited about the tapir and how important they are to the land. As a teacher of children myself, sometimes I get so discouraged, because even if I were to soften the heart of the child again towards animals, I know that their parents have such a greater influence on them, and the children themselves in their current state can't create change.
Right.
It feels kind of defeating if your only hope is to change the minds of children. But I think it is important for us to focus on these things. I think it is important for us to know these things. I think that the more we know and care about these things, the more likely we are to figure out what we can do. And I think, like you mentioned at the top of this section of the show, is every single one of these animals is in jeopardy because of animal agriculture and what animal agriculture is doing to this planet.
Right. And it's unnecessary. We can get our nutrition from plants.
So yeah, the more we can stop supporting animal agriculture in any way, and stop participating in these powerful, very wealthy corporations, the more we're standing up for the lowly, the weak, those who need help from us.
Need defended, 100%.
So it's very much in line
with the gospel.
Yes, with the gospel.
Well, the kingdom ethic. It really is everything we've been saying. So hope you enjoyed this, and just a little focus on the animals and ways that we can be better stewards of this planet, this creation that God has given us, and living into a kingdom ethic. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.